Everyone. Welcome to the East Bay Regional Park District Board Executive Committee. Today is 5/11/2021, and we are starting at 12:37. Madam Secretary, will you please take roll?
Yes, this is Becky Fang, Recording Secretary, taking roll. President Rosario.
Here.
Director Corbett.
Here.
Director Coffey.
Here.
Okay. Park District staff participating in this meeting include General Manager Sabrina Landreth, Deputy General Manager Anna Alvarez, AGM Christina Kelchner, AGM Carol Johnson, AGM Jim O'Connor, AGM Tony Chaburo. We have Brian Holt, Devin Reef, Catherine Dudby, Matthew James, Rachel Arbios, Juliana Shermer, and Eric Fuhler. And we have Park District staff who are participating in this meeting that will be making a public comment on one of the agenda items.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Today's Board Executive Committee meeting is held in accordance with Governor Newsom's executive order, allowing for board members to participate in standing committee meetings remotely. We are providing live audio and video streaming. The public can provide comments three ways: live via Zoom, by submitting an email, or leaving a voicemail as noted on the agenda. This information can be found on the agenda, which is posted on the district's website at www.ebparks.org. If there are no questions about the meeting procedures, we will begin.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Becky. So our first item is the San Francisco Bay Restoration and Regulatory Integration Team. Dr. Alvarez.
Yes, thank you so much, Dee. Good afternoon, everyone. Deputy General Manager, Dr. Anna Alvarez. It is with great pride and enthusiasm that I shepherd today's item on the San Francisco's Bay Restoration. Well, we are joined today by Amy Hudson, Deputy Executive Officer of the California Coastal Conservancy, and Luisa Valiela, former Chair of the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority's Advisory Board, and with the US EPA Region 9. If I can have both Lisa and Amy join me while I conclude the introductions. Hi, ladies. Let's see. Both of them have been key partners to the Park District in helping advance marshland restoration. And introducing the item, I would like to take the opportunity to reinforce or underscore the urgency of expediting as much as possible tidal wetland restoration within the next 10 years or by 2030 to ensure a nature-based solution to the adverse impacts from sea level rise. As I've said before, that we have discussed with the board directors here at the East Bay Regional Park District, this race against time can only be won through partnerships like this and putting into place what we call game changers, such as Brit, or also what we're doing here is integrating the regulatory permits necessary to conduct this work in this small window of time. Both Amy and Luisa have led these efforts, which have allowed for two of our own projects to swiftly advance through the permitting process. And with that brief introduction, it is really with great pride that I introduce Luisa and Amy, because both ladies have been truly inspirational as we continue to just understand the urgency and how to best bring forward those tools that are so necessary to be able to be ready to manage the natural world in this changing climate. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Amy and Luisa so they can continue with the presentation. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Dr. Alvarez. That was the touching introduction, made my week. And Luisa and I are gonna team a presentation. I first wanna just thank East Bay Regional Park District for being a steadfast partner on this Baylands restoration work, both with the projects that you've been undertaking, as well as through your partnership with the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority. And without East Bay Parks, we wouldn't have been able to put Measure AA on the ballot. So thank you very much for the loan, which I believe has been all paid off now, to help with access costs. And then the continuing participation in the Restoration Authority through Dr. Alvarez's participation on the advisory committee as the vice chair for a number of years. And the support for this Bay Restoration Regulatory Integration Team. Louisa, do you want to say any introductory remarks? And I'll pull up this. Actually, can I share the screen, my screen, Becky? Is that, oh yeah, here it is. Okay. While I share my screen, Louisa, if you want to say anything.
Thanks, Amy. I don't want to take up too much time. I do work for EPA Region 9 in the Water Division, and I've had the privilege of working with Dr. Alvarez and Amy Hudson at the Coastal Conservancy for many years, focused on Restoration Authority successes and then segueing into making sure that Brit can be as successful as possible. So in the interest of time, we'll kick off our presentation, and Amy's going to take the first slides. We're going to trade off. We've been doing this dog and pony show actually for several months now. So hopefully it'll show. We'll get through this quickly so you can ask questions. Take it away, Amy.
Yeah, no, that was no pressure, Louisa. So if we mess up now, be really bad form. But yeah, the Bay Restoration Regulatory Integration Team, or the BRIT, has been established now for about a year and a half.
Amy, if I may, do you want to
yeah.
switch your viewing mode to a presentation? Because we're seeing your notes. Mhm.
Oh, or my lack of notes. Let's see.
Yeah.
How do I do that? Oh, I see. Display settings.
Yes.
Okay.
Swap.
How is that?
There you go.
Oh, good. Okay, great. All right, next slide. So the BRIT was established fairly soon after passage of Measure AA. So with the passage of Measure AA in June of 2016, many of the entities involved in getting Measure AA on the ballot met to discuss what other tasks really needed to be addressed in order to assist restoration projects in moving forward in a timely manner. And the regulatory environment was identified as an area that could use support. So despite these being restoration projects, which have, long-term benefits to the environment, they can have short-term impacts, and the permitting process for restoration projects can frequently, take quite a bit of time, and as was saying, we have in this decade, and sea level rise is really creating a need to accelerate the pace and scale of restoration so that we have vegetated tidal marsh in place when the sea level rise curve kicks in. The BRIT, its purpose is to improve the permitting process for multi-benefit habitat restoration projects and associated flood management and public access infrastructure. And it is for voluntary restoration projects, not mitigation restoration projects. And it really started off with a proposal from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We were meeting the agencies shown here on the slide, meeting for about a year, and then the BRIT proposal was put forward. And this was days when people could meet in person, and the first agreement for the BRIT. So the schedule to date, I said, we started meeting soon after passage of Measure AA in early 2017. Then the proposal for the Brit was put forward. We began convening the managers of the state and federal regulatory agencies, secured all the funding for the Brit by March of 2019. And the Brit was fully staffed and kicked off in August of 2019. So at the time, it seemed like it was taking a while, but it's actually, looking back on it, was incredibly fast to pull this together. The Brit permitted their first project, 900 Innis in San Francisco, in August of 2020. And we'll talk more about the project workload. But they continued to work on permitting projects. And we have funding to support the Brit through at least June of 2024. I think we'll probably have funding for another year after that. And the funding for the Brit, it's approximately $1.2 million a year. The Restoration Authority is putting in about half of the funding. The other funders are the Bay Area Toll Authority, the Coastal Conservancy, East Bay Regional Park District, and Valley Water. And once again, thank you for supporting the Brit. And the staff of the Brit, actual human beings, sometimes this seems like a bit of a bureaucracy, real people working really hard. And the names are on the left. Not all of them are pictured, like Jen Sue from EPA is not in this photo. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Louisa.
Thanks, Amy. So we've actually even updated this slide I see, which is great. So the Brit, in terms of like describing what does the Brit do when you're thinking about these people, as Amy said, your funding goes to essentially making sure that projects get the attention of each agency that they will need to get permits from. So you're paying for people time and the synergy that is created by having these identified staff people working together. So Brit has a workload currently of about 18 projects, has already permitted 4 projects, and is doing a lot of tracking of where each project is in its phase. The secret sauce around Brit is this, what we're calling a pre-application phase, which is the investment of time from each of these agency folks with the project applicants as the project is planned, designed, developed, whatever you want to call it. It's the investment of time, setting up meetings, going on site with the project applicant, discussing issues which can be identified either from the regulatory side or the project applicant side as early as possible in this planning process, so that by the time the project is ready to be permitted, the applications are ready to be submitted, everyone is in agreement that there will be no surprises in the information that's submitted with the permit application, and thus the timeframes that are established for most agencies, each one has different timelines, but those timelines can be kept, and there would be no reason that a permit would be kept, would be held up or put on hold for any reason through its permit process. And those are our performance measures that are built into the Brit process, keeping that permit authorization and negotiations and consultations kind of on track. So here, this slide just gives you kind of a sense of their current workload, and we expect it to kind of be the workload that Brit will continue to have throughout its lifetime. A pretty heavy workload. We have a lot of projects, a lot of interest, obviously, in, as Amy said, accelerating the pace of restoration. And so far, our agency public servants have been keeping up with this workload, which is quite exemplary, actually. They've also spent a lot of time in providing a very useful, resource-rich website for the Brit, so that project applicants have a place to go, one place to go that gives them preparatory information. You know, we'll get into it on the next slide, you know, what Brit needs from you to kind of give you the right kind of feedback, but also developing information as we do our own lessons learned about working through these projects. What are the problems that continually show up? What kind of guidance can we develop? What kind of examples or templates can be built that the Brit will host on their website that applicants can use. So if you haven't visited the Brit website, please do. We and they are really open to feedback in every way on how useful the tools are, what could be missing, etc. All right, next slide. So there is, as Amy said, there's no candy coating the fact that getting projects through the permitting phase can be difficult, and that we knew that going in. It's continually reinforced in terms of the projects that are certainly that were first on docket for the Brit. The Brit had projects that were actually in permit application phase, and so didn't get the benefit of the pre-application, the early investment of time in the project planning, and so hurdles were identified in the permitting process. But thankfully, the Brit team, was there to kind of help the project applicants work through it. And even as difficult as that was, there were even lessons learned from there that will help us inform, hopefully streamlining or offering other templates of approaches, state and federal, for other issues that will certainly arise with other projects that are coming down the pike. So we want to acknowledge that there are, this group is problem solving. That is definitely what we are all tasked to be doing. Part of the process is putting things in writing as well, trying to be consistent and be clear. Both the applicant has to put information in writing, and there's guidance on how to do that. And then Brit itself, once it receives information, does a really good job internally. And we've learned how to do that better over time, over the course of this year and a half as well, of, what does a coordinated response look like? We're moving away from each agency having a response and just sending it together, as opposed to each agency looking at each other's comments, identifying conflicts, resolving them. And so feedback, hopefully given back to the applicant, has done some early problem solving with the team working in advance, the team being the regulatory team. Next slide. Is it just me? I'm not seeing it switch.
There it goes.
So the Policy and Management Committee, an equally important part of Brit. We use Brit in a little bit loosely. It does have it's the acronym. We're regulatory agencies. We love acronyms. Sorry about that. So Brit also has a component that is the next level up in agencies, the Policy and Management Committee, PMC. They meet regularly as well. They meet monthly, and they are not only an oversight group for their representatives on the permit writing team, the Brit team, but they're also another problem-solving forum and are the keepers of the policy improvement list, which is also built into our performance measures with the San Francisco Restoration Authority Governing Board, where we have essentially upfront indicated common issues, common problems with permitting projects that really require higher level. I mean, permit writers shouldn't always bear the burden of having to solve huge regulatory conflicts that have been baked in essentially to the way our state frameworks and our federal frameworks are what we have in our laws and regulations. So the policy improvement list identifies those types of issues, and the PMC is the forum at which there is higher level discussion of those issues. And if an issue can't be solved at that level, identification of what would be needed, what other higher level of effort would be needed to resolve an ongoing regulatory issue. Next slide. I think
this one is my slide. So I'm not going to go into detail, but it is possible to add projects to the Brit project list, and we have a call out for project submittals right now through mid-June. So right now, East Bay Parks has 2 projects on the project list, Hayward Marsh and Coyote Hills Restoration. And as other projects on the Alameda or Contra Costa County shorelines move forward and need to start consultation with the regulatory agencies, projects can be added to the list. And back to you, Louisa.
Thanks. So one of the things that we want to build essentially is a culture shift or culture change where regulatory agencies are really working collaboratively with project applicants, again, in early phases of a project plan and design. And so part of what Brit is being clear on is, what services they offer, these pre-application meetings, the types of information that will be needed for them to digest, where the project is at. Obviously, site visits, COVID had definitely interrupted that for quite a while, although some agencies are being allowed back in the field, so they're ramping back up to being able to offer that service, and it is a very important part of understanding a project and project constraints, obviously. And then you'll have a point of contact once a project is on the list, as Amy said, so that you have always where to go to get it, status or set up another meeting with the Brit team. And you'll also get a sense of how many meetings Brit thinks it will take. And a project applicant can always ask for more meetings, but essentially once you have your first meeting with Brit, it can then be planned for how many iterations of back and forth of information sharing will be necessary to get closer to the permit application phase. And again, if any issues are identified early on, there is now an issue elevation protocol from Brit to the PMC for issues that applicants want to move through the Brit to the PMC. So that's also available on the website. Next slide. And this is to underscore also, again, it's a partnership. So Brit is offering a lot of time and attention to help these projects get to the goal, getting permits and getting them in the ground. But the partnership also includes having a project applicant really be prepared with the level of information that they can provide it in writing, provide it to the entire Brit team. And when the time comes, understand what each permit. So I loosely say, no regulations were harmed in the making of Brit. It still requires that applications go into each agency as per always. So an applicant needs to know how many agencies they are sending permits to, that sometimes permit fees are associated with that, so that there's a lot of preparation by the project applicant to make sure that that once all the issues have been resolved, that the permit applications will result in a timely permit. Next.
So that is our
self-explanatory. Take it away.
I know that's our presentation, and again, thanks to East Bay Parks for all the support. We are right now writing up our second report on the Brit. We did a initial report to the Restoration Authority Board after 6 months, and now we're doing a report for the first 1.5 years. So at the June 18th Restoration Authority Board meeting, we'll be presenting a report. It'll be available on the website too, with a lot more quantitative info about how the Brit has been performing. And I'll make sure to send that report to East Bay Parks. I'll make sure you get that report. But you're also welcome, anybody's welcome to watch the Authority Board meeting, which is it's got a packed agenda. I think there's like 8 projects going to the board as well. So thank you very much. And yeah, we'd love to take any questions or comments.
Yes, thanks for making time for us.
Oh, you're welcome. Questions or comments from the board? Director Corbett.
Well, thank you very much for this excellent presentation. I always get very excited when I see people working together for on behalf of our shoreline, especially along San Francisco Bay, and their work you're doing to beat the clock on climate change. So thank you so much for that. My quick question would be, there's various different agencies that I'm sure will be coming before you with projects. And an agency like the East Bay Regional Park District, we're thinking about things like, Bay Rise all the time, and have some great people who focus on those issues. Are you able to help some agencies that may not have, as many resources? I'm thinking that there might be some cities even that don't get to focus just on shoreline issues because they have so many other issues that they have to deal with. So how do you help those, and how do they know that you're out there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's something the Brit and the Restoration Authority in general has thought about. Like, how can the authority better serve communities? So, whether that's small cities, community-based organizations, people with an interest in the shoreline and in habitats on the shoreline, but maybe they don't have the same level of expertise and capacity as someone like East Bay Parks. So I think the authority itself has been doing quite a bit of that recently, and ran a community grants round this past year. The Brit, I think our hope is that it will help those who perhaps not otherwise have had the capacity to go through the pretty arduous regulatory process. I don't think we're quite there yet. I think even individuals and organizations who have a lot of history and capacity with the regulatory system still get flummoxed by it. But that is the goal, to be able to support entities who want to be doing these sorts of projects. And a couple of the projects on the Brit list, I think City of San Leandro has a project on the list. Marin Audubon, a nonprofit that's basically all volunteer run. So there are some examples, but got a ways to go.
Great. That's very good to hear. Thank you.
Director Coffey, did you have your hand?
Yeah, this is for Christina. Christina, I'm curious who within ASD is responsible for shepherding the permitting process through Brit that we're undertaking at Coyote Hills and Hayward.
Thank you, Director Coffey. Christina Kelchner, AGM of ASD. That would be Lisa Gorgian and Chris Barton, along with input from our stewardship team with Matt Grawl.
So I might have a question. It would be a good question for Chris Barton, and I can get back to him on it. But and it may be a little unfair because it's early in the process. As Amy pointed out, there's some hiccups with the process when it's just up and started. But I'm just curious what our experiences have been with the new process, with the Brit process, and whether we're seeing the benefits that go with the intent of coordinated integrated effort. And Chris would be able to contrast it to what he went through with the Bay Point restoration project under the old system. And that would be interesting to hear. So I could do that sometime.
Absolutely, Director Coffey, and I can provide a little information that for Coyote Hills just didn't need that many permits, only a CDFW 1600 permit. And the Brit process, so we didn't go through the whole Brit process, but he reports that the Brit process was helpful in making that determination, because sometimes just untangling what permits you actually need can be a challenge. So I think that we have not brought a project through the whole Brit process yet, but we're hoping to do so in the future.
Thank you, and thank you all for the presentation.
And if I may, Director Coffey, you should also know that Matt Grawl and Eric Fuller joined me at the beginning meetings at the very early onset of even conceptualizing Brit. We were invited by the Coastal Conservancy and others to join that big think tank. And I can say with confidence that the feedback that was received by Matt and also Chris Barton was invited to provide feedback, was incorporated as Brit was developing its guidelines and the goals that were intended to do. So the East Bay Regional Park District has been benefiting from the beginning of this process and will continue to benefit in the future.
Thank you.
If I might add, it is something that we ourselves are interested in. And as part of that, we now actually have a survey, an onboarding survey essentially for people on the project list, how they feel going into the process. So it's an enter survey, and we also will, at this point, it's just an exit survey. We might want a midpoint survey, but we don't have one of those yet. But for our own internal processing of what's working and what's not, we are at least, we're, as part of our standard operating procedures, we now have a enter and exit survey to kind of get client satisfaction feedback.
Great. I just wanted to say congratulations to both Amy and Luisa for being able to get a handle on this 9-county agency and actually bring it together and work towards to goals so that everyone can apply to. And incredible work, incredible amount of work of your time and your expertise. And Luisa, I just want to especially thank you for your efforts in helping us fund our Dotson Marsh, and I understand it was quite a bit of a leap of faith to fund our McCosker Creek project, and we're so indebted to you. Thank you so much. And
my pleasure.
And my question is, we've been our last as a board, we lobby in Sacramento and also in DC, and we've been lobbying heavily for cutting the green tape. And I was wondering if you've seen any progress in that towards that goal.
Amy, you can take that.
Yeah, I have been participating quite a bit in Secretary Crowfoot's Cutting Green Tape initiative, and that there is a not sure if she's a undersecretary or deputy secretary, but Jen Norris, formerly from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, is now running that out of Resources Agency. I think Department of Fish and Wildlife has done quite a bit, especially on the North Coast. They have put together with the Water Board these strike teams for different watersheds on the North Coast to move anadromous fish restoration forward. And, I think there's that Cutting Green Tape report. There's a lot of different suggestions. Only a few of them are legislative in nature. Most are more administrative, dealing with CEQA or fully protected species. It's not the sort of thing that's going to happen instantaneously. And I think it's
Uh-oh,
Oh,
she froze.
Yes, we seem to have lost you, Amy. I'm not sure if you can hear, but we can certainly hear more from both Amy and Luisa pertaining to the green cutting the green tape legislative effort. And I can certainly have her email you, Director Rosario, if you'd like to know more.
yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I'd like to know if we're getting close to shortening that time for the permitting process, especially for agencies like ourselves that have a proven record and have hopefully built some trust with the regulating agencies to go forward with some projects. So
Sure, and we'll certainly send your inquiry to Government Affairs because I'm sure
Great.
Eric will would like to weigh in. Amy, you froze for a little bit. Welcome back. Well, she's still frozen.
Oh, she's frozen again.
Yes. Okay.
yeah, I think I'm freezing again.
We just heard you.
I'm going to stop talking.
Okay.
Thank you so much, both of you. That was a great presentation and very timely.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And we are next. Next is item 3, Concord Hills Regional Park naming selection.
Thank you, Director Rosario. Christina Kelchner, Assistant General Manager of Acquisition, Stewardship, and Development. The purpose of this item for the committee is for the committee to consider a name for the future regional park at the site of the former Concord Naval Weapons Station.
Right.
As stated in the staff report provided to the board last week, staff recommends that the future park be named Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50. This recommendation is based on staff's careful consideration of many possible names and follows years of public engagement that included workshops, surveys, research, conversations with key stakeholders, and substantial and significant input from the local community. The name Thurgood Marshall Regional Park invites an exploration of themes of equality, racial justice, and social protest. Thurgood Marshall is a national figure who advocated for the rights of many communities of people, including the rights of Black Americans and his work with the NAACP, as well as the rights of Native Americans as sovereign people, and the rights of workers to safe working conditions. So just as Thurgood Marshall's career as a lawyer and a Supreme Court justice spanned many decades and affected many different groups of people, this future parkland is a land with many layers of stories and many layers of truths, including stories of Native tribes, racial injustice, civil rights protest, and precious biological resources, such as the endangered red-legged frogs that make their home on the property. Staff believes that the legacy of Thurgood Marshall is a fitting name that is expansive enough to help us tell all of the stories of this land. The other half of this name, Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50, has emerged as an important name to honor the history of the tragic explosion at the Port Chicago Naval Magazine, as the base was called when the explosion happened in 1944, and the 50 young men, many of them very young, only 17 or 18, who, in the wake of that terrible explosion, stood up to challenge the US military for unjust and unsafe working conditions, and were unfairly charged with mutiny as a result of their courage to take a stand. The name has also emerged as a significant symbol to the regional Black community, who established a public space where African American history is told, where Black American heroes are celebrated, and where the Black community is truly and explicitly welcomed. And it's in a location where Black Americans were explicitly excluded at the time that the explosion happened by a sign at the entrance to the town of Port Chicago that read, "Negroes not welcome here." Names can serve many purposes: to honor park champions, to create a sense of place, to give the public a sense of what they can expect to experience at a park. One of the most important functions that a park name can serve is to help educate us about the stories of the land, who has lived and worked on the land, what stories have happened there, and the way that the land endures and connects us all. The name Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50, is already serving the purpose of educating, exploring, and connecting around these stories. Staff at the Park District has had wonderful opportunities to meet with and learn from the knowledge of many people, including historical experts, tribal representatives, and the leaders of the local Black community. Personally, going through this process has opened my own eyes to just how many of our stories, American stories, local stories, are forgotten. I did not learn about this story of Port Chicago in school, and neither did my children, who grew up less than 20 miles from the base. And while I have known about the Port Chicago story for several years now, it was only when I had an opportunity to listen to the members of the Black community who came forward, including colleagues and coworkers here from the Park District, that I began to feel the story and to understand the impact that the not telling of this story has had and continues to have on all of us in the East Bay. I'm grateful to the person who first told me the story of Port Chicago when I came to the Park District 7 years ago, the Park District's Chief of Planning, Brian Holt. I suspect that for many people in this meeting, Brian was their first storyteller for this story too. For the past 15 years, Brian has been working in collaboration with Reverend Diana and the Friends of Port Chicago and the National Park Service to learn this history, how it relates to our future regional park, and to continue to tell the story. It's an honor to introduce Brian today and hand over this presentation to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Brian Holt, Chief of Planning, Trails, and GIS. It is an honor to be here to the Executive Committee and presenting on this important decision. So I am going to share my screen and we're going to dive into the presentation here. A lot of the historic background around Port Chicago, the Port Chicago 50 and Thurgood Marshall, I think were captured well in the staff report and staff materials. So what I'm going to present to you here today is, of course, the naming recommendation, but some of the process of how we've gotten here, what's included in the land use plan, and just some of the other considerations there. So I wanted to start out with this photo because I think it's striking in that this is what the public has experienced of this property since the 1940s. It has been a restricted area where people have not been able to access, and just one of our most important goals is to work towards providing access to this property, providing access to all, and making this site welcome. And as Christina says, the recommendation of Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50, explicitly welcomes the African American community to this site, celebrates the African American history, and really pays tribute to the bravery and the courage of the Port Chicago 50. So that is the recommendation of staff, is to accept that name. I do want to acknowledge that this is a community recommendation. This name was generated by a series of community groups, and I do want to recognize our own Black employees, the Citizens for Historical Equity, the Friends of Port Chicago, the NAACP, and everybody who's engaged to come together around this name and embrace it. Next steps will be, we bring it to the Park Advisory Committee, May 24th, 2021, should the Executive Committee support it, and then we will bring it to the full board on June 1st, 2021. And just for reference on the side here, we do have a picture of the Port Chicago 50 on the pier, of course, Thurgood Marshall, and Spencer Sykes Sr., who was one of the sailors there. And I had the pleasure of working with Spencer Sykes Jr. For many years as he served on the board of the Friends of Port Chicago. So very close history. I do want to acknowledge this is the ancestral homeland of the Chukon people, and their stories are important. And I do want to acknowledge the many Native people who engaged in our conversation on this, and we'll discuss that a little bit more in the presentation. But this is the location of the site. We are talking about 2,540 acres located on the former inland area of the Concord Naval Weapons Station, the former Concord Naval Weapons Station. And this property really forms the green belt between the cities of Concord and Pittsburgh. Of course, the city of Concord has development plans for their Concord Reuse Project area. Similarly, Pittsburgh has development plans for their side of the property, their side of the other side of the hill there. And then north of Highway 4, you can see where the Port Chicago Naval Magazine National Memorial is, and Military Ocean Terminal Concord, MACO. That's the Army base that is still very much in active operation. So just real quick, going over some of the park features. Again, this will be a 2,540 acre regional park. Just for context, that's twice the size of Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, and would be one of our larger parks. This future regional park provides expansive views of Mount Diablo, the Diablo Valley, and the San Francisco San Joaquin Delta. We have inherited a vast network of former Navy infrastructure, including many miles of abandoned rail lines and roadways that'll serve as the base for a network of new planned trails, over 22 miles of new trails throughout the property. And then we have the military infrastructure that includes approximately 70 munition magazines that are spread throughout the site, and really serve as a dominant feature of the landscape. They're sort of gracefully tucked into hills in different places, or groupings of magazines on the floor, and they're really inescapable and really define the site. These magazines provide a great opportunity for creative reuse and interpretation of the property's history. And our land use plan has contemplated a number of different reuse scenarios of these various magazines. And you can see the interior of one of the sites here, and then just a rendering of possibilities of how the exterior could be repurposed. And then we have a number of buildings on the property, including this building, IA 24, Inland Area 24 building. It's a former maintenance building that's in the center of the property. And this is the building that we have always envisioned as the future visitor center that would serve to tell the story of Port Chicago and serve the Port Chicago Naval Magazine National Memorial, and also be a space where, you know, all the stories of the property could be told. So this visitor center will focus on the history of Port Chicago, its aftermath, and the role it played in our nation's ongoing struggle for civil rights. We have a number of other buildings that are also proposed for repurposing, either as outdoor classrooms, of course, maintenance and operations facilities, and archive facilities. So just want to go through some of the background here, because I think it's relevant and it's important to sort of understand the journey that we've been on this property. So 1942 is when the Port Chicago Naval Magazine was originally established. And that initially just included the 7,600 acre tidal area, the area north of Highway 4. And at that point, it was a transfer depot. There was no on-site storage. So munitions would be shipped in from all across the US and come here, and, you know, trains would sort of stack up, and there was, you know, a need to unload the trains as quickly as possible. And that really led to some of the unsafe working conditions that required speedy unloading of trains and onto ships. But the site was also operated as a segregated facility. So the most dangerous jobs went to African Americans, as white officers ordered them to unload these trains. And that ultimately led to the explosion at Port Chicago on July 17, 1944. Where, as we know, 320 men died, over 2/3 of them African American. And then, of course, the events that ensued after that with the unjust mutiny trial and the involvement of Thurgood Marshall, and ultimately the events that led to the desegregation of the military in 1948. In 1945, the inland portion was purchased, and this was in response to the explosion at Port Chicago. It was to provide for additional storage to address those safety concerns that had become so evident as a result of the explosion. Of course, it was later renamed to the Concord Naval Weapons Station and continued to operate throughout the Cold War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War. Was a site of protest during many military engagements until it was ultimately closed, the inland area, in 1999. In 2005, it was officially closed. That's when the tidal area was transferred to the Army, whereas continues to be operated as Military Ocean Terminal Concord. In 2006, the Concord Reuse Project was initiated to evaluate the reuse of the full 5,200 acre property. In 2010, the reuse plan was adopted, designating that site designating approximately 2,540 acres of the site for a new regional park. And then plus significant development within the EDC area, the Economic Development Conveyance property on the city side. So that's 12,000 new homes, 6 million square feet of commercial. We, the East Bay Regional Park District, also work closely with National Park Service and Friends of Port Chicago in helping to write the legislation that established the Port Chicago Naval Magazine National Memorial. And what was included in that legislation was specific authorization for the National Park Service to partner with the East Bay Regional Park District to develop a visitor center that would highlight the history of Port Chicago. And then between 2010, 2019, a really significant period of just ongoing planning and negotiations and conversations regarding the biologic opinion for the property, all of the real estate necessary to facilitate transfer of the property until ultimately we accepted possession of the future regional park site in 2019. And then in 2020, we adopted the Concord Hills Land Use Plan, guiding the future park development of the site. So the naming process. So the naming process has really been ongoing throughout the public land use plan process. Names were solicited throughout the entire process. During every public meeting, public hearing. We had opportunities for the public to provide suggestions on names. We engaged in a number of individual conversations around the park names during the public workshops. And then also garnered input during a number of Port Chicago commemoration events that happened on the property. A survey of the top names were circulated by the City of Concord, City of Pittsburgh, Save Mount Diablo, and East Bay Regional Park District. We received, I think, over 1,500 responses of those. We also included just a open-ended suggestion where additional names and comments could be offered. And certainly we heard a lot of interest in a Port Chicago affiliated name on that, as well as a name that reflected the Native American history of the property. So the survey results and other suggestions were presented to the Park Advisory Committee and the Executive Committee. The survey, there was broad support for just the name Concord Hills, but we also communicated that themes supporting either Native American history or Port Chicago history also emerged. At that time, the PAC and Executive Committee directed staff to engage with Native peoples to explore a possible Native affiliated name. Through a series of meetings with Native tribal leaders, we developed a couple names and presented those to the Executive Committee. And that's where we really started to see a lot of broad interest and communicated that this site should be named to reflect the Port Chicago history and the African American history of the site. We continued to engage in conversations with both tribal leaders and the various groups that were supportive of an African American affiliated name. And of course, have continued to hear from everybody during our various public meetings. And then just clearly a broad coalition have emerged that supports the Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50 name, which brings us here today. So why does staff support this name? One, we have seen that there's broad community support, and that's important. Certainly celebrates a prominent leader who fought for civil rights for all. As Christina mentioned, a long history of fighting for Native American sovereignty, of course, African American equal justice, and just a long and storied history. And it provides immediate educational opportunities regarding our nation's past and our continued struggle for civil rights. And certainly we've seen a number of people that continue to understand this story and bring it forward and really are embracing it. And I think that's so important. And then as Christina mentioned, just the broader themes of social justice, protest, and resilience that really provide an opportunity for deep storytelling of the site's history and all the stories on the property. There were a number of conversations about the tagline, home of Port Chicago 50. And it was really, talking with some of our colleagues and some of the other groups, the Citizens Committee for Historic Equity, that I really came to understand just, the importance and significance of this tagline and recognizing the Port Chicago 50. The bravery of the Port Chicago 50 to, during an era of segregation and Jim Crow, to step up and protest an order from the Navy. We often hear about the bravery of people like Rosa Parks and others, which certainly not diminishing that, but we have not heard enough about the Port Chicago 50. of course, this was an early act of organized civil disobedience, calling for safer working conditions. This is a labor story as much as anything else. As Christina mentioned, Black sailors were not welcome in the town of Port Chicago. And just the significance of their protest and the national attention that it garnered directly led to the desegregation of the military. But we also heard just the significance of the word home to the historically excluded African-American community. And that's certainly something as a white male, I wasn't able to see very, evidently right in front of me. And I really appreciate just hearing from my friends and others, just what the significance of that and having a place specifically designated to celebrate African-American history, what that would mean. So I just want to take a moment to kind of pause and reflect on who the Port Chicago 50 are. We also often talk about them as a group, but these were all men with names and families. Many of them were teenagers. They signed up to serve their country and wished to do so honorably, and they were treated horribly by our country. Their service has never been properly recognized, and I just think it's important that we reflect on who they are. And also I think important to understand that each of these men had stories after their protest, after their service. And I think it's, part of the power of the recognizing the Port Chicago 50 is to understand those stories and to understand just how this event impacted their lives and how we can make sure that we never repeat that history. So of course, the consideration and the direction to name this property after Native peoples is certainly in keeping with the Park District's mission and something that we need to continue to find opportunities to honor Indigenous history and acknowledge Native peoples today. I think part of the benefit of this process has been understanding that, and part of these conversations, recognizing that there's a broad constellation of actions that the Park District can take to honor Indigenous history and to acknowledge Native people. Certainly we can consider actions like designation of cultural easements or joint stewardship opportunities at sacred sites. That was some of the feedback that we did hear from Native people specifically was, names are important, but they also really would welcome a greater connection to the land through the Park District, and that's something that we can explore. We would love to work with Native people on developing a more formal land acknowledgement process that ensures accurate land acknowledgement on all of our park signage, maps, and interpretive materials. We are slated to begin, and we need to develop a cultural resource management plan for the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservation Plan area. This includes Deer Valley, Clayton Ranch, some 15,000 acres of property that has significant cultural resources. And so this is an opportunity to really work in partnership with Native people in that. And then of course we can explore future naming opportunities at our currently unnamed parklands like Clayton Ranch or Deer Valley, Vasco Hills, Doolin Canyon, and other sites. I do want to acknowledge this is one of the stories that we had heard from Native people as we were engaged with them was about this healing pole that exists down in Indian Canyon down near the Hollister area. This pole was carved from a salvaged piece of Alaskan cedar that survived the Port Chicago explosion. And I believe we have a video from one of the Native people that we worked with describing the significance of this pole later. So I just want to acknowledge and just deep thanks to all of the tribes that engaged in the naming discussion. So they're listed here. They gave of their time generously and offered their stories and their history and really engaged with staff And I specifically want to acknowledge Devin Reef, who facilitated a really great outreach process, very respectful outreach process, and working with people to develop names and to also follow up with them as recently as yesterday to make sure that they understood what staff's recommendation was and the reasoning for it, and again the opportunities to continue to partner and work with Native people. So looking to the future, as I've said before, I think one of my goals is I want to get this property open to the public so people can enjoy it. So we did adopt a land use plan. It was approved in July 2020, included 22 miles of trails, group camping facilities, picnicking, outdoor classrooms, like I say, the interpretive reuse of magazines, the visitor center that we've discussed, and significant areas designated specifically for natural and cultural resource protection. This is a big site with a lot of opportunities to tell the full broad history of this property, the Native history, the history of protests during the Vietnam War, just the Rancho history, and an opportunity to really celebrate and embrace the African American history here. And then just wanted to highlight the visitor center that is proposed in the land use plan, that is approved in the land use plan. This partnership that we have with National Park Service that was authorized through the Port Chicago Naval Magazine National Memorial Enhancement Act. We have the cooperative management agreement between National Park Service and East Bay Regional Park District that was signed in 2015. It was renewed in 2020. This would serve as the primary park destination, really highlighting the Port Chicago explosion and its aftermath. And it's a large space with facility for community meetings, film showings, symposiums, really an opportunity to provide space for conversations around the site's history and our nation's history. And then of course, this could be an area where folks can actually make reservations and board the shuttle to visit the Port Chicago Naval Magazine National Memorial when it's open. Part of the reason why we have worked towards this facility on this site is because the Naval Magazine National Memorial is located on an active Army base. It is not always available to the public, and it is limited to reservations. So this would be a site where the public could access the history and then also could use it to access the actual memorial site. So with that, that concludes my presentation. Again, our recommendation is a strong and full-throated support of a recommendation that has come from the community and is embraced by the community. Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50. So we ask that the Board Executive Committee recommend that we move that name on to the PAC and the full Board of Directors. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and thank you very much.
You're on mute.
Great, thank you. Excellent, thank you so much for that presentation. Questions or comments from the board? Oh, wait, we should probably hear some public comments first.
Oh,
Yes.
I think I'd like to actually ask some questions.
Okay, we can do that first.
Yeah, that's how we usually do it. So I was prepared to proceed if, or
Okay.
Ellen can proceed if she's got some questions. No, go ahead.
After you.
So I wanted,
No, after you.
thanks. I wanted to, first of all, thank Christina, Brian, and Devin for a staff report that I found so strong and compelling in terms of the reasoning and the recommendation itself, that it really actually moved me. It was very well written, and I enjoyed reading it, and just want to thank you all very much for that effort. Is your coming, and I can fully embrace and support the recommendation. And I appreciate, Brian, how you used your presentation to kind of fill in for the written staff report. That worked out well, and answered a whole bunch of my questions all by itself. So what I have left is a kind of a conceptual question and observation here. And it has to do with some of the larger issues that occur if the full board actually chooses this name and we then implement it. And it seems to me that that would be an excellent launching point of using this name. And it became to me clear that it was the best name because of the highlight to not just the Port Chicago history that it reveals, but it will generate a lot of interest and attention because of that social justice theme that it'll have to it, but it'll bring a lot of interest and ultimate attention to the many layers of history that you outlined as associated with the site, including the Native American culture and history of the site, the post-war Cold War history and events that took place of some significance. So I think this name is the best to bring the overall generation of the most interest and opportunity to fully cover those many layers of history at the site. And it's going to be a launching point, I think, for the Park District to enable to pursue some larger issues, Brian, some of which you've already helped me with, in particular, the need to continue the ongoing effort toward exoneration. And, you know, I've been following this through a close association over the years with John Lawrence, who I met, it pains me to say, but it's almost 50 years ago now when he and I first met as volunteers in the then 29-year-old George Miller's first campaign for Congress in 1974. So I guess I've known John now, you know, close to 50 years. And he thought this concept was useful and referred me to an article that he and Thurgood Marshall, I think you referred it to me as well, Brian. He and Thurgood Marshall Jr. published last year on the history of exoneration efforts that they've been involved in. And Congressman Miller, of course, championed, and now Congressman DeSaulnier. Would it be reasonable, Brian, and to try to channel some of our own efforts toward coordinating with this launch, the need to keep up on the advocacy for exoneration that will exist, and to keep this just amazing coalition that has been put together, championing this name, you know, together for such an endeavor.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, anything that can continue to increase the discussion and the understanding and the history of the story, and to push for exoneration and continue to push for, you know, bringing the vision for the visitor center and the park to a whole is something that
and then similarly, it seems to me that all this energy here would be useful to join with us in pursuing the various federal and state funding sources for the visitor center, and especially to augment National Park Service funding through you know, generating this energy toward those efforts as well.
I'll weigh in on that. Yes, absolutely, Director Coffey. Thank you for all of those comments. And yes, we will be working with, we are already working with the General Manager, Landreth, and Eric Fuller in Government Affairs to reach out to our representatives and continue those conversations. And we think that this focus of social justice is going to help to generate some opportunities for interpretation and also for funding and support for the park.
Okay, very good. And then that reminded me of one of my questions, and that is, initially, my understanding was the National Park Service had some reservations about a Port Chicago related name to this park, but I've been told that those reservations are gone now, and they're fine with this name.
That's correct. And I think that's kind of historically, you know, these things, these conversations, and sort of, you know, evolved, and that was sort of old thinking, and have certainly moved on beyond that. and they're fully in support.
Okay, and then my last concept observation is that the energy and determination around this coalition that's been built could basically, if we provide background information, help with the city of Pittsburgh. You know, as the Faria development, which is has initially been planned to be brought right up to the entire eastern border, or close to the entire eastern border of this new park. As that development navigates its way through the Pittsburgh land planning and actual street planning and housing development planning process, we need all the help we can get in influencing the city council and the management to create significant buffers to protect the park's mission to provide wildlife habitat in several locations. And it seems to me that we could endeavor to channel some help with that effort over time. Does that make sense as well?
Yeah,
It does.
Yeah, I would
And
just say,
as-
Director
Right,
Coffey,
yeah.
I would accept that as a comment and a recommendation. I'm not hearing a question from you in there, but certainly all of the ways that we can support the development and the protection of this parkland, I think that this naming will help with all of those efforts.
Okay, and finally, I just wanted to ask if it was reasonable for us to send a copy of the staff report to the City of Concord. A couple of members, including our PAC member, Councilwoman Obringer, expressed an interest in, and the mayor, by the way, both expressed an interest in being able to update their own recommendation. You know, I'm guessing, but my sense is they probably like to join in supporting this proposal and the name. I think there is time to give the City of Concord that opportunity.
We did provide them a copy of the staff report for the executive committee, and certainly we will continue to touch base with them as we move forward to the PAC and to the full board.
All right, that's great. And I'll say this and then quit. Did you discuss at all the potential timing of the phased opening of this park? Because I know Director Lane is very interested in that.
Yes, thank you, Director Coffey. I think Brian touched on it briefly, but we are planning to really dig into that later this year after the construction season. So it's on the work plan for design and construction to really get that project underway and to focus on the south of Bailey Road area, which is a 900 acres. So in and of itself, a large area. And we'll be focusing on the design for that and improvements that are needed to make it safe and suitable for public access.
And I just want to add on that, but just, I guess, maybe for the public's benefit, but to, before we can implement improvements and actually get the public out here, we did have a neighboring landowner that did challenge our land use plan, and it's currently under litigation. So, so that has to be resolved as well before the public can get there.
All right, thank you, President Rosario.
Great. Director Corbett.
Thank you very much. And I very much appreciate Director Coffey's strategic thinking. Appreciate it very much. I don't really know where to start except to say this is a great day, and this is a significant day. And I know this is just the committee, and that this issue will go before the board. But I'm just so very happy that we're where we are today. And before I speak to the naming and the recommendation, I want to speak just a little bit about the process. I think it's so significant as well, the part of this process that created the strengthened relationships with tribal leaders and the very great and sincere efforts of our staff to develop those relationships. And that's kind of where we started in a way when the executive committee weighed in on the thought for taking a look at developing those relationships with potential naming, recognizing the history of the indigenous peoples that we so appreciate as part of our park's histories that we need to tell more about. I think it's quite significant. One of the attachments to the report today shows the names of the tribes sort of superimposed across the rest of the map. And I hope we continue to do that in so many places on our websites and when we drop maps for all of our parks. I think this is just the beginning of that. And I think the relationship with our tribal leaders, we should certainly not view today this recommendation as an ending of that relationship or that discussion, but a very, very beginning phase of our continued work with them and to build and develop work that has been done in the past by our staff, including Beverly Ortiz and those that are here today reporting. That includes Christina and Brian, and I hope Devin is listening too. So thank you for that, and I look forward to that, and I know that President Rosario will probably have some comments about that too, our future work with our tribal leaders. I just think that's so important, and I wanted to touch on that. And then on the strategic issues that were brought up by Director Coffey, I do want to mention that I believe that this is a great opportunity to strengthen even further our relationship with the National Park Service, because the significance of this naming is national history. You know, it's something we're doing here at the Park District, but it's huge. We're talking about recognizing an extremely significant and important figure in our history, Chief Justice Marshall, and obviously a very significant historic event. And we're going to do what we can to tell the story that has not been told in the past, and that is of Chicago 50. And of course, Port Chicago 50, and of course, as part of that history, to remember those that lost their lives as part of this historic event. So this is a huge event. I think it will reverberate to Washington, D.C. I think this is the type of thing that the president might hear about and the vice president when this naming occurs. So it's really important. And I think we've learned so much in the process. The really important difference when choosing a name for a park. And that was taught to us by all of the people who advocated for this naming. And that's an important lesson for us. And I just want to appreciate the board and as well, and the committee for those few stops along the way when we had an opportunity to listen to the public and say, hey, wait a second, let's look at this a little bit more and a little differently. And obviously staff stepped up to help support those efforts and do that real good groundwork that we see in the report today. So I just want to thank you for that. I've probably talked enough, but I so appreciate that we are in this place today. And I'll just say a couple of things about my knowledge of the history of Port Chicago. I grew up in East Bay. It's nothing that was taught to me when I was in school. It was something I learned more about actually when I was in the legislature, because every year Mark DeSagne would get up before the legislature and commemorate the history at the time of the anniversary of that particular year before the legislature and tell the story. And many people throughout the state learned about it because of Mark's efforts. And I think that is extremely important. And I didn't even know about Thurgood Marshall's participation until I attended. This was before I was on the board. There was the event that the Park District held at Concord, and when the Park Service folks came out, and I was walking around the booths that were set up and reading through some of the scrapbooks, and I started reading these original newspaper clips telling the story of Thurgood Marshall and his participation, and his advocacy and representation of the Chicago 50. And I remember just kind of going, whoa, I didn't know that. So it's really an amazing day to see that really wonderful advocacy has led us, and credit goes to the advocates who have brought us to where we are today. I better shut up so we have a chance to hear from some of them during public comments. So thank you. This is great work.
Great, thank you. I hardly agree with both my colleagues and their statements. I just wanted to thank staff for taking the time to listen to the stories from all the communities. And I think as both Christina and Brian, you're telling your stories, just reinforces the fact that humans depend on stories. Our life history depends on stories. And when we hear those stories, it affects all of us. And I really appreciate the time and the effort it took to listen to those stories. And I really appreciate the community coming forward and telling their stories, because they're fabulous. And a wealth of knowledge and compassion, empathy in those stories. I just want to congratulate staff on being able to do that. And I think it's a credit to our agency that we are taking the time to listen. And I think it's very, very important. The importance of this naming, I'm in the middle of Obama's memoirs, there's a time at the then Senator Obama is talking with Senator Ted Kennedy. And he's asking him about, is it his time to run for president? And Senator Ted Kennedy says, and I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember the exact, says basically that you don't get to pick if it's your time picks you. And I think this story of naming this park for Thurgood Marshall, this is our time. And the nexus of everything that we've come through to now points to this naming, and I heartily support it. And I also am a huge advocate of having every park tell the story of its Native American heritage, and I hope I'm really celebrate the fact that we are in a better place in connection with our Native American tribes, and I hope we have a better and broader focus. That's the right word. It's kind of in renaming our parks and acknowledging the history and the contributions of our Native Americans. So with that, where are we? Public comments.
Yes, President Rosario, we will first start off with written comments. The first written comment that I will read is from Reverend Diana McDaniel. My public comment is to thank the staff for the recommendation of the Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50, as the official name of the Concord Hills Regional Park. I am hopeful that this name will be fully approved by the Executive Committee and the full board. Thank you and blessings. The second public comment is submitted by Citizens for Historical Equity. Dear Board of Directors, we support the East Bay Regional Park District staff recommendation that the future park at the former Concord Naval Weapons Station be named Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Chicago 50. The letter is signed by various elected officials throughout the East Bay, and you have a copy of this. The Citizens for Historical Equity also submitted another comment that I shared with the committee earlier. It says, Dear Ms. Feng, please share with the board our final park naming proposal with endorsements, and it contains a link to a PDF document of the proposal. And finally, the last written comment was submitted by Megan Sikumbi. Greetings, President Rosario, General Manager Landreth, and members of the board. My name is Megan Sikumbi, and I work at East Bay Regional Park in Interpretive and Recreation as a recreation coordinator. The names on our regional parks are iconic: Chabot, Tilden, Reinhardt. As a Park District Recreation Coordinator that works with communities in Alameda and Contra Costa County, I enthusiastically support adding Thurgood Marshall to that list. Thurgood Marshall has a long, illustrious, and inspirational life and career. At the future Park and Visitor Center, we will be teaching the story of the Port Chicago disaster and its aftermath, which encompasses a pivotal moment in Marshall's career. The tagline, "Home of the Port Chicago 50," indicates to the public that this story takes place during World War II, when Thurgood Marshall was chief counsel of the NAACP, and highlights the great sacrifices of the brave patriots of Port Chicago. The proposed name also describes the location of the story through the words Port Chicago, directly in the park name. The community's united naming recommendation, including both Thurgood Marshall and the Port Chicago 50, is a perfect way to invite and inform the public of the education they will receive at the future park. I stand in solidarity with thousands of community members, museums, educators, veterans, historical societies, Park District employees, and organizations who support honoring Thurgood Marshall and the patriots of Port Chicago by naming the Concord Hills Park Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50. I also want to support the families of those veterans whose lives were lost that day. It is important for this story to be told and for our communities to know the sacrifice of these brave patriots. Thank you for all your hard work to keep our regional parks accessible and inclusive for all. That's it for the written comments. And if you're ready, I can start the public speakers.
Yes, please.
Okay, the first public speaker is Canyon Sayers Rhodes. She is unable to attend and asks that we share her pre-recorded video comment. And with your approval, President Rosario, I will ask Rachel Arbios to start the video.
Yes, please.
Mishmin Tuhis, Conracat Canyon, Coyote Woman, Sayers Roots. I am daughter of Tribal Chairwoman Anne Marie Sayers, and we come from the Indian Canyon Mutsun Band of Costano and Ohlone people. We are on the only federally recognized Indian country between Sonoma and Santa Barbara, and it is so very important that we honor truth and history, the many layers. I apologize for the dogs. That being said, behind me, this healing pool is a Alaska yellow cedar healing pool that was actually at Port Chicago. And it's 800 years old. It was over a ton. And it was used as a buffer for the explosives during World War II. It witnessed segregation, it witnessed civil rights, and it's part of history. And as an Indigenous person who has ancestry to the Bay Area, I find it really important that we honor truth and history in all of the levels, in all of the forms. And Indian Canyon is a significant space because my mother has opened up this trust allotted land for all Indigenous people in need of land for ceremony. And people come to Indian Canyon annually. Before COVID, in excess of 5,000 visitors. And we don't get state funding, we don't get federal funding, we are not federally recognized. However, we recognize how important ceremony is for the community. And I recognize how important it is for the community to understand the beautiful layered history in these spaces and places that we occupy in today's post-colonial settler environment. Here in the East Bay and all over the Bay Area, there's beautiful layers of history that our community can benefit from if they get the opportunity to interface with these layers of truth. Because this healing pool, when we look at its story, we could learn about the Cultural Conservancy, which is currently in Ramaytush Ohlone territory. Cultural Conservancy does so much for the community. And the John and Karen Larson Foundation, which helped create it. Shane Tonu Eagleton is a world-renowned carver, and he helped carve many healing pools. One is standing at Mount Shoreline Amphitheater in Mountain View, and there's one at the Bronx Zoo. There's one in Hawaii. There's a few in a few other places. And this story is really beautiful because this healing pool is a healing pool today, yet it was used as a buffer for explosives at Port Chicago. And It witnessed the uprising of civil rights and the uprising of community stepping up to be respected as community members. And so it's so very important that we honor truth and history to the best of our ability. And right here, there is a flag of acknowledging missing and murdered Indigenous women, because it is very important to raise awareness wherever we are in ways that we can. So as an Indigenous person who traces my ancestry to the Bay Area, I am a huge proponent of advocating for truth and history by facing the public and offering educational material of all narratives and perspectives. I do want to prioritize California Indigenous history because the way my community, my ancestors, and my relatives and my neighbors, my ancestors' ancestors have tended the land, stewarded the land, managed the land, both with fire and with our traditional ecological knowledge. It is so very important that this history is brought to light, and recognizing that Indigenous peoples are still stewarding and tending these territories. Our education system has done us a disservice by not acknowledging this history, and we can change that. And we can include our relatives and other community members that have a beautiful connection to history in these places too. So I really want to be an advocate and voice that this healing pool is a beautiful story that can be celebrated to bringing our communities together. So I want to say thank you from our community, and anywhere we are, our decisions have an impact. Consider how your actions and words impact not only yourself, your community, your environment, but the next 7 generations. How are you being a good ancestor in training? What does that legacy look like? Are we including and recognizing our kinship to nature, the rights of nature? Are we familiar with UNDRIP? I ask you that. I hope you consider that. Thank you. Oh.
Very nice.
Thank you. Okay, I will call the next public speaker, Yolanda Barrio-Knight.
I can't unstop my video. There we go. There we go. Thank you. Can you hear?
Well, right now you're frozen.
Oops, you froze.
You're frozen, Yolanda. Yolanda, if you'd like, I can come back to you. Okay, why don't we go ahead and do that? I will come back to Yolanda so she can get situated. I have Mr. Lewis Thrower. Are you here? Yep, perfect.
Good afternoon. Hello, my name is Lewis Thrower, board member with Citizens for Historical Equity. We would like to sincerely thank Park District staff for recommending this community-supported park name for board approval. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Yolanda, are you ready?
Yes, sorry about that. My computer froze. So thank you. And I'm going to read you my public comment. Hopefully everyone can hear me. And it reads, good afternoon, Executive Committee Directors Rosario, Corbett, and Coffee. My name is Yolanda Barrio-Knight, and I'm a 29-year employee of the Park District. I am here before you today to express my gratitude to my coworkers, Brian Holt, Devin Reef, and Christina Kelchner, for not only listening to the many African-American stakeholders and voters who formed a strong coalition of folks who have never met personally, and to a strong coalition of like-minded communities advocating to name this park, Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50. Not only did you, my coworkers, listen, but you each crafted this beautiful staff report that speaks to the engagement of the African-American community and many local and state electeds. electeds. Citizens for Historical Equity, whose white paper was historically accurate and whose petition created a buzz in our communities, made each one of us sit up and realize that this park is indeed the only park where this history can be told. And this district, which is known for being the best in the nation, is the only district that can tell this story. Our interpretive staff can and will expand its interpretation of this story to include all of the details that so many have never known. Thurgood Marshall was the one who did the advocacy work that is done in the halls, or as DGM Alvarez always says, discussions around the water cooler. This is where stuff happens. When mission and passion merge, new directional action always happens. This park will be the first park named after a Black person in Contra Costa County. It will not only acknowledge Thurgood Marshall, it will also honor the sailors, all young boys and men who died doing their jobs in 1944 for the Navy. This nonviolent inaction revealed the need for desegregation of the Navy, and Thurgood Marshall was just the Black man to advocate for this new direction. History is not just for one group. History is history, the good, the bad, and the ugly. When we downplay one to support another, we do as so many have done in our history, pit one minority against another. Those days are over. If we don't all rise, we won't all rise. If this history makes you uncomfortable, then understand that our entire lives as people of color, Black, Native American, Asian, Pacific Islander, Mexicans, is uncomfortable. What some feel now is what we feel every moment, and what we learn. We have to learn from the moment we first walk. As we study history that has never included any people of color in any other way than enslaved, savage, impoverished, and uncivilized. And we realize this history that we are taught makes us uncomfortable. We know it's not true, but you never did. The indigenous population deserves to be honored, and in some cases the district has done so. However, it can always do more, and we as employees of the Black Employee Collective will continue to advocate for all peoples, including our own history, whose history must be told by the Park District. This first step is history in the making. It will reverberate across the nation. And I have no doubt that the children of color will gravitate to this history and to this park. And I, for one, am looking forward to being a volunteer and going into a park where my sons and their friends and families of color will be welcome. Thank you, directors and staff, and a special shout outs to Christina, Devin, and Brian for putting forth this name, Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50. Thank you.
Okay, our next public speaker, I believe we have Antioch Mayor Lamar Torper on the line.
I'm here.
I can hear you.
Okay, it said I couldn't start my video, so you must not want to see my pretty face, but it's okay.
There you are.
Oh, there I am. Yes, yes. Well, thank you. This is very exciting news. I'll first start off by, thanking Christina, Devin, and Brian for that, wonderful staff report and accounting of our history. That was so critical, I think, for the public to understand and because it's just the right thing to do. But and I also want to thank the directors here today, Director Rosario, Director Corbett, and of course my favorite director, Colin Coffey. He's our representative in East County, so I have to give a special shout out to Colin. Thank you for your outstanding remarks today and show of support. I think it's important. This is so important. I just want to tell you about what happens when we don't tell our stories. In the year 2000, I joined the Navy. I didn't recognize that 56 years before me joining the Navy that there was this explosion at Port Chicago. Had no clue. Every single day when I was at the Naval Justice School, I'd walk to the chow hall from my class during lunch or dinner, and I'd pass by the USS Forrestal, not recognizing that the USS Forrestal was named after James Forrestal, the former Secretary of the Navy, who in 1946, as a result of the ripples of change that happened out of this explosion, helped prompt him to desegregate the Navy. So before the US Armed Forces were desegregated in 1948, the Navy had already led the charge in desegregating its barracks, its housing, its ships, everything. And I took that for granted, walked by there every single day, didn't recognize the significance that that man had on my life and why I got to eat lunch with white people, Latino people, Asian Americans, everybody. And so, which led to 1948. I'm more embarrassed to say that then here I am on my 40th year in this world and still didn't understand, even as a Navy veteran, the significance of Port Chicago and what it meant for me as an African American and for our country. Not just for African Americans, because let's not forget that desegregation led to the deshackling of white people, not being able to adhere to a system that was wrong, inherently wrong, even if it crossed their moral values. And so the work that you're doing here today is just not regional, it's national, it's global, because the events there are about a story about who we are as Americans, who we are as a global community. And I couldn't be more thrilled to lend my support as mayor of the city of Antioch and have encouraged others to do the same for this important effort. And Director Coffey, I couldn't agree with you more. True justice won't be met until all of these sailors are honorably discharged and exonerated for being wrongfully charged for really exercising their right to protest inhumane working conditions. So I want to thank you all for this important moment. I'll be at the next meeting giving my 2 cents, and I look forward to continuing this important effort. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, and our last public speaker is East County AACP President, Ms. Victoria Adams.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, Executive Committee members. Again, my name is Victoria Adams, and I'm president of the East County branch of the NAACP. First, let me say thank you to the Employees Committee for your recommendation to move the name Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50, forward. And to Director Coffey, I want to say thank you for your willingness to focus on social justice efforts that surrounds the Port Chicago 50. So thank you for that. I know the last time I addressed the body or a body within the Park District, I asked you all, how much begging must we do? You heard from the NAACP, members of the United Veterans Council, of course, the Citizens for Historical Equity, numerous committee members, and now you're hearing from your legislative officials. And that's just to name a few. Our young people, so many of them, voicing the same sentiment. So today I am here to let you know what we expect of you. And what we expect of each of you, that is for you to be okay, simply to be okay with our story being told. The time has come for you to do the right thing, and it's okay. It is okay. I am not only advocating as a representative of the NAACP, but I am also a product of this community. I also have history in this community. I also have family and friends in this community who have suffered through this tragedy. I can also tell you the story of how my aunt, who witnessed and felt the explosion, who was lifted off her feet and laid on her back when it occurred. So we all have history here. So what I say to you, it is so simple. Get to your fellow directors, help them understand to just approve the recommended naming of the park, Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50, our story. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, President Rosario, that's all I have for public speakers.
Great. I just want to thank everyone that spoke today, public comments. I think I've commented several times that how eloquent and elegant everyone is, and truly appreciated hearing your stories, and we will go forward. So we are now, any further comments from the board before we take a vote?
I'm ready to make the motion.
Please do.
So moved
Second.
that we adopt the staff recommendation to name our beautiful new park, the Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50.
Excellent. And I believe, so we have a motion from Director Corbett and a second from Director Coffey. Madam Secretary, can you please take a roll call?
Yes, Director Corbett,
Aye.
Director Coffey,
Aye.
President Rosario.
Aye.
Okay, perfect.
Unanimous. So the recommendation goes to the full board. Thank you all very much for all your incredible work to get us to this point. And I'm feeling good about it. Let's see. Oops, let me look at my agenda. Okay, we just had public comments. Any other public comments on anything not on the agenda?
I have no additional comments.
Okay. Well, then with that, any further board comments?
Well, I have one. I really appreciate Coyote Woman going to the effort she did to make a video for us. That was both just awesome thing to do and was very moving. And for anyone interested, I've been watching Coyote Woman's YouTube videos in order to learn how to do appropriate acknowledgements. So her work and her online work has been very helpful to me personally.
Great. Director Corbett, last words?
It's a beautiful day, and I'm proud to be a member of the East Bay Regional Park District Board of Directors, and thankful to our public who stays engaged and gives us great recommendations. Thank you.
Great. I just wanted to thank everyone. Both presentations were very, very good today. The San Francisco Bay Restoration Regulatory Integration Team, and then of course our Concord Naval Weapons Station renaming. So well done, everyone. Look forward to our next executive board meeting, and I look forward to renaming our park very soon. I think I'll attend that PAC meeting. General Manager Landreth, would you like to say any last words?
Thank you, President Rosario. I will be very brief and reserve my remarks for when this comes to the full board, assuming it's going to come to the full board. But just great meeting, and well done to staff and to the public comments. And I had a chance to go, and Brian took me out to the park yesterday and did a site tour, and just to be able to stand there and to visualize park and to connect it to the name and the recommendation was really moving. And this is I think a really historic day for the district and something everyone should feel really proud of.
Hear, hear. Well done. Okay, well, with that, I think we are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you all. Great meeting.